Today I am going to deliver my lecture on India and her neighbours. Whenever we talk about our neighbourhood, the name that first comes to our mind is of Pakistan, but we forget that there are other countries, other neighbours beside India on all sides. If we look at the map of India, then we can see that if we look south, there is Sri Lanka, there is Maldives, and if we look east, there are countries like Bangladesh and Myanmar. And on the northern side, India have that invincible China, there is Nepal, there is Bhutan, and on the western side, we all know there are two countries, that is one of our most important, its neighbor, that is very well known neighbor, that is of Pakistan, and also the far flung Afghanistan. Today our lecture will be focused on all the other neighbors barring Pakistan. So, the map of India was not like this before 1947. At that time, India was a country that consisted of all the entire subcontinent, that means Pakistan and Bangladesh were also included in the Indian part, Indian map. But after 1947 and after the partition, India became an independent country, and now it came out of the clutches of British foreign policy. It was no longer a British Indian foreign policy, but a Indian foreign policy, and henceforth India started to have its own neighbourhood policy. And the pioneer of this neighbourhood policy is none other than its first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. So, Nehru, he very pertinently understood the importance of India's strategic location in South Asia. He realized that India's security strategy has some geopolitical and regional implications, and he understood that if there is any threat for India, it must be from a regional source and not from outside, because from time immemorial we have seen that India has received threats from its western frontiers, its northern frontiers, and though we saw that the Europeans came by the sea, but basically in the changed scenario the threats will come from the land borders, and so we have to be very careful about its strategic location. So, Nehru, he understood that the neighbourhood should be the India's sphere of influence. It was like India's Monroe Doctrine that America used to have in the western hemisphere. So, Nehru wanted to pursue Indian foreign policy in the direction that Indian influence exists in the South Asian subcontinent. Though it was not very successful, but after a new regime came, that is in the form of Rajiv Gandhi and Indira Gandhi, first of all Indira Gandhi, Indian foreign policy, or specifically the India's neighbourhood policy, underwent a few changes. India now emerges as a regional hegemon in the South Asian subcontinent. And one of the striking feature of India's foreign policy or neighbourhood policy in this time was that one of the thing is that India now did not resist itself from doing military interventions if it thinks that its national interests are threatened. We can see that in 1971 how India intervened into the internal matters of East Pakistan, and it led its military enter East Pakistan and fetch a new state of Bangladesh out of it. So, by doing these things, India wanted to ensure that it did not have enemies in both the frontiers, east and west. So, this was a strategic victory, and this was done very subtly by the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and it was very significant as it was done in the Cold War era, and at that time when the Soviet Union and the United States of America were at loggerheads. So, and another thing that Indira Gandhi she emphasized is that it is the Indo-centric disputes should be solved bilateral. That means bilateral commitments, bilateral discussions are the key to the India's neighbourhood policy. And India wanted to emerge as a regional security manager, that means it is the big brother of South Asia. And the same attitude was reflected in the acts of Rajiv Gandhi too, when he led the Indian army intervene into the internal matters of Sri Lanka in 1987. The LTTE problem was a burning problem for India. So, next, after the regime of Rajiv Gandhi came the regime of Narsimha Rao. He was quite different in his approach regarding the India's neighbourhood policy. He did not want India to interfere into its neighbours' domestic and political affairs. That was quite different from his predecessors. But the striking change that came to Indian foreign policy, or to be more specific in its neighbourhood policy, is in the year 1996, when Indian Prime Minister Dr. Indra Kumar Gujral, he announced his Gujral Doctrine. What was said in the Gujral Doctrine? The basic points that Gujral highlighted was non-reciprocity with the small neighbours. That means, India, if it wanted to be a big brother, then it has to be generous to its smaller partners. So, again he also emphasized that no territory of any South Asian state to be used against any other state. That means, no terrorist organizations or no organizations as such can use a state's land or territory to harm some other states. This was the principle, and also one of the most important features of this principle is non-interference in each other's internal territory, and also gaining mutual trust, dispute resolution at the bilateral level through peaceful means. That means, the most important word is peaceful means. He did not want any military interventions or military actions. And one of the last but not the least, the solution to one problem not to be linked with the concession by others. That means, one problem has one solution, that was very clearly identified by Gujral. So, the Gujral Doctrine, it was like a pillar, that upon which the future Indian foreign policies or the neighbourhood policies were based upon in the latter stage. When in the latter stage, Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh, they came to the power, they wanted to emphasize the regional institutions like SAARC. The multilateral institutions like SAARC were emphasized by Manmohan Singh and Vajpayee both. They wanted to have an economically prosperous South Asia through the institution of SAARC, protect national interests of India by economic integration and economic interests of India to be more specific, and territorial integrity is very important, and territorial integrity is also to be safeguarded. But now, the striking change that came in the India's neighbourhood policy, that is in the time of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2014. Modi came and he drastically, what he did is that he invited all the leaders of the SAARC nations at the Wat ceremony. India now wanted to shade its impression as a regional big brother, but a leader of the regional integration, development politics, mutual trust, focus on shared prosperity. That means, India would now develop itself, and also it wants that its South Asian neighbours, they also develop with India, and a peaceful environment exists in South Asia that will be conducive for the development of each and every country in the region. And for that reason, India needs to bolster its highways, its connectivity. The connectivity is the key to a number of problems. It is the panacea of all kinds of problems here. So, the construction of highways and rail infrastructure was a very important point in Modi's neighbourhood first policy, and establishment of power grids, because power is very important in today's technological world. So, neighbours would now will get resources for commercial diplomacy too. These were the striking change. Whether Modi succeeded in his venture will be discussed, will be analyzed in the future. Now, the question comes from here, when was the Gujral Doctrine announced? So, now we will discuss about India's bilateral relations with its neighboring countries. The first country that comes to our mind, or first country that is very important apart from Pakistan, is India and China relations, the China. The People's Republic of China was established in 1949 and India in 1947, but after that in the year 1954 in India and China they signed the Panchashil principles that was to be the guiding principles between India and China. The Panchashil principles, that means 5 principles, they enumerated that there should be mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty, mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equal and mutual benefit working relationship, and mutual non-aggression and peaceful coexistence. But the principles were breached, and in 1962 we can see China invading into India regarding a border dispute in Arunachal Pradesh. So, the major irritants that existed at that time are not still over. The major irritants of India and China relationships are border disputes, the issue of Brahmaputra, China's Belt and Road Initiative, economic relations, and China's maritime strategy. So, border disputes, there are actually 2 specific border disputes between India and China. The first one is regarding a territory that India claims to be of its own and China also claims to be of its own, that is a part of Kashmir in Ladakh area that China says is Aksai Chin and it is actually in Chinese occupation. And also in the eastern part of India there is Arunachal Pradesh as a province of India, Indian state, and China claims it to be its own part and a part of Tibet. So, actually regarding the dispute regarding Arunachal Pradesh, China invaded into Arunachal and almost captured it. So, the devastating war of 1962 happened at that time. Also, we can see the issue of Brahmaputra. The Brahmaputra actually it originates in China and then it flows through the Assam and it goes into Bangladesh, but China is now trying to build some dams that is going to divert the waters of Brahmaputra, means for generating hydropower and all, and if these programs are materialized, then Indian, that means a part of Brahmaputra in India would dry up and eventually kill a number of livelihoods and populations in India and Bangladesh. So, that is a very important problem for India. Also, the Belt and Road Initiative of China that says it is a development strategy, but it is actually a very strategic policy that tries to encircle India with Chinese military bases and all, and India is very much worried about the Chinese aggression in South Asia. And regarding the economic relations also, China forms an integral part of the global supply chain, and we all know how the Chinese products are flooding the Indian market. So, it is a very India actually experiences a huge trade deficit, that means India is importing much more than it is exporting to China, and there is a trade deficit between these 2 countries that is hurting the Indian business interests. Also, there are the problems of maritime strategy, that means China is trying to build up a blue water navy, that means that is hurting India's relations in the Indian Ocean. Now, coming to our next country that is very important, it is in eastern neighbor Bangladesh. It only came into existence in 1971 when East Pakistan was invaded by India and a new country based on the language came up named Bangladesh. But there are some problems in the Indo-Bangladesh relations over the years, because there are problems like land boundary agreement. There are certain enclaves of India in Bangladesh and there are certain Bangladeshi enclaves in India, but that problem was solved by a land boundary agreement, and also that was ratified by our Indian Parliament by the 100th amendment in 2015. So, another point that is very important in India-Bangladesh relations is Teesta river agreement. There is no agreement between India and Bangladesh regarding the water distribution of Teesta, and India cannot make the treaty with Bangladesh due to some internal problems and domestic political problems. So, that is the issue that is going to infuriate the Bangladeshi people also. Now, for this part, our question is what is the BRI or Belt and Road Initiative of China. Okay, so, our next country of discussion is Nepal. India and Nepal share a very prosperous relationship from the time immemorial, but now in the present age there are certain problems that crop up between the Indo-Nepal relationships. The first one is the territorial disputes that appears between these two countries. So, Nepal considers the source of the Kali river, the historic river near Limpiadhura, which is higher in altitude in the rest of its rivers flow, and also it considers the areas like Limpiadhura, Lipu Lake and all considered to be their own territory, which India also considers to be them. So, there is a problem regarding these three areas between the India and Nepal relationships, though these problems are going to is creating some problems between the two governments. There is also a problem regarding the Madhesi tribe in the residing in the Tarai region of Nepal. India gives its support to the Madhesis because there is a number of Indian connections between the Madhesis and the Indians. So, there is a problem regarding the constitution when the constitution was being made in Nepal and they were not given their rights, and India embarked into a unofficial blockade that Nepal alleges to be India hurled upon themselves and hurt the Nepali interests. Again, the Indo-Nepal Treaty of Friendship that was signed in the long 1950s, and our section of Nepali population is also not happy with that treaty because they consider this treaty is advantageous for the people of India and not Nepal, and India is taking undue advantage. But again we can see that the bedrock of Indo-Nepal relationship is this treaty, because this treaty allows Indians and Nepalese to cross the border and open and go to the other country without any visas and passport and anything, and there is the border between these two countries is open and it facilitates the trade relations also. Again, in the recent years the China factor is also affecting the Indo-Nepal relationships, because Nepal is also now playing the China card very well, whereas there is the communist government of KP Sharma Oli, we all know he played the China card very well. He now wanted to have intimacy with China, and India is obviously not very happy with the ongoings or the proceedings of this relationship. Another mountainous country that India has as its neighbor is the Bhutan. The Bhutan is a very important country for India's strategic location and strategic policy. Indo-Bhutan Treaty of 1949, it is the key driver of India-Bhutan relationships. India recognizes the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity of Bhutan, but this treaty also talks of cultural cooperation, sports development, cooperation in science and technology and healthcare. And the most important thing is that India and Bhutan have agreed to also have an open border between themselves. Under this open border system, citizens of India and Bhutan have a right to move into each other's territory without a visa. And another point in this treaty that is very significant for India from Indian perspective is that Bhutan has to seek advice of India in matters of its external affairs. A number of commentators think this provision as oppressive, and this is a kind of neo-colonial design of India, but still it is the bedrock of Indo-Bhutan relationships, and Bhutan is India and Bhutan relationships is quite cordial and amicable, we can see in the recent years. Under the Indo-Bhutan Treaty of 2007, these two sides have actually agreed to cooperate closely with each other on the issues relating to their national interests. Neither government shall allow its territory for activities harmful to national security of the other nations. The government of Bhutan and the government of India agree that Bhutanese subjects residing in Indian territories shall have equal justice with Indian subjects, and the Indian subjects residing in Bhutan shall have equal justice with the subjects of government of Bhutan. So, the next country that comes to our discussion is Afghanistan. A part of Afghanistan that share its border with India is actually now Pakistan occupied Kashmir (POK), but still Afghanistan is very important, and in 1949 India concluded the Treaty of Friendship with Afghanistan to set up its diplomatic relations, but for a long period of time India did not have its diplomatic relations when the Taliban were ruling Afghanistan. But after the 9/11 attacks, the Taliban were rooted out of the Afghanistan, and American forces they took over the country of Afghanistan. There was a new government. Then India again started its diplomatic relations. India actually have constructed major projects like parliament building in Kabul, the Zarani Delaram highway project connecting western Afghanistan with the strategic Chabahar port in Iran, and Salma Dam project. So, again these are the developmental projects that India has undertaken in Afghanistan, and now in the recent past the capture of power again by Talibans may hit the developmental works of India and overall relationship of India and Afghanistan. Now, if we look into the eastern side direct from the western side, now we could see the country of Myanmar stands as a very important pillar of India's look east or act east policy, because Indo-Burmese relations were strong in the past we can see, but now the overthrow of democratic government by the military of Myanmar the junta government came to power actually at that time. The India condemned the suppression of democracy. Myanmar also ordered the expulsion of Burmese Indian community, increasing its own isolation from the world. But now India and Myanmar they are now trying to establish a cordial relationship, as India is now building road connectivity and all to the with Myanmar to boost up its trade and economic activities. Two of the major connectivity projects like Kaladan project and trilateral highway are the major cause of concern and needs high level attention. And so, there is another problem that is very important for both the countries, it is the problem of the Rohingya refugees, and it is a matter of concern for both the governments. Now, if we look south, the India and Sri Lanka relations have been of much debate and discussion in the recent past or in the past years or the past millennium, whenever it is, because the fact of liberation of Tamil tigers Elam, it was actually a organization of the Tamils and Sri Lankan Tamils who drew some kind of sympathy from also the Tamilian populations of India, and India due to its domestic political affairs had to support or somehow give some moral boost up to the LTTE forces at one time, but afterwards we can see that there is Indian intervention in Sri Lanka also, and now in the recent past Sri Lanka's intimacy with the Chinese government has been a matter of concern for India. And also you can see the military training exercise between Indian army and the Sri Lankan army is known as this Mitrashakti, and also there is a maritime exercise between Indian Navy and Sri Lankan Navy to boost up its defense cooperation, it is known as SLINEX. Now, if we look further south, then the country that comes at the last of our discussion is India, and that is Maldives. Maldives is a very important or very I think popular tourist destination, vacation destination for the Indians, and so Maldives plays a very important role in the Indian foreign policy or Indian neighbourhood policy. India was the first to recognize Maldives after its independence in 1965 and to establish diplomatic relations with the country. India had offered Maldives an economic recovery package of almost $1.4 billion during the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the island nation, and after the COVID-19, Maldives was the first to receive the COVID-19 vaccines, one of the first countries actually to receive the COVID-19 vaccines from India when India gifted them to the neighboring countries. But in the matter of concern for the Indian establishment is the India Out campaign that is going on in Maldives, that is carried out by a section of Maldivian populations, and also the Maldives intimacy with the Chinese government, and China is also intervening in these affairs of Maldives. So, we hope that neighbourhood first policy will have a success, and we will have a kind of cordial and amicable relationship with our neighbours, and that will create a very ambient and conducive environment for trade, development, investment in South Asian countries. So, the question last question that comes to my discussion is what is the name of the maritime exercise between India and Sri Lanka? Thank you.